63 years ago, something happened that has followed me my whole life. I never told anyone, until today. Today, I am 75. People keep sending me balloons and punctuation-heavy texts, but the truth is, I don't feel celebratory. I feel like a man who has carried a box marked fragile across decades and finally has to set it down. So keep your congratulations. I want to tell a story. I did not tell it because it would have sounded foolish, or because no one would have believed me, or because it was easier to lie to myself. The older I got, the harder it was to keep lying. Death is not as frightening as it used to be. Silence still is. The year was 1950. The place, a small town in Maine with a 2-block main street and a library that smelled like paper and paste. I was 9. My father had been dead long enough to become a story. My mother survived by giving orders to anyone within range. Summer was a long, hot argument I didn't want to have. I decided the library was the best place to spend it. It did not have much in the way of children's books, but it had air that felt safe, and fans that chopped the heat into manageable pieces, and tables where a boy could be left alone by the world. I was not a popular child. We didn't have money, and I carried the look of a boy who wears last year's shoes and knows it. My only friend was Danny Pike, another kid from the wrong end of town who pretended he didn't care what he didn't have. He had the kind of grin that made adults suspicious and other children jealous. If Danny liked you, the day got easier. The town library had been a post office once. You could still see the old teller windows sealed inside new walls. One librarian worked there most days, Miss Clark, a thin woman with hair like gray steel wool and a cardigan that could stop a bullet. She was not cruel. She was precise, the way knives are precise. She ran the place like a train schedule. No bare feet, no food, whisper, don't talk. She enforced the rules without raising her voice, which somehow made them heavier. The library also had a cat. It was black in ordinary light and strange in sunlight. The volunteer who fed it swore that if you caught it just right, mid-morning through the front windows, the fur at its ribs let the color of the world through, as if the bones were outlined by light. We called it Whisper because it moved like one. I was the only kid who could coax it onto my lap. The day that matters began because of that cat. Danny and I spent that summer like bench barnacles. We read what there was to read and then began to invent reasons to stay. Copying maps, sorting newspapers, vacuuming the services Miss Clark never seemed to notice. She noticed everything, including us, and eventually decided to employ our restlessness. We were allowed to help with returns if we moved carefully, did not chatter, and stayed out of the back rooms. There is a difference between out and almost out. Miss Clark trusted me a shade more than she trusted Danny, so she sent me behind a desk to stack the return books on a cart. While I did that, the cat hopped up, walked along the counter like a small inspector, and found a gap I swear had not been there the day before. A finger-wide space between the end of the shelves and the wall. Whisper squeezed through and vanished.
Children follow cats the way rivers run downhill. I slid the cart aside, pressed my shoulder to the gap, and felt cool air pull at my skin. Danny arrived exactly on time to be wrong, shouldered the shelf a little, and the panel shifted like a door that had been waiting to remember it was a door. We heard paper rustle, air move, and then a click like a coin hitting a jar. Miss Clark said from the front, without turning, that staff areas were staff areas for a reason. She didn't raise her voice. She did not need to. We obeyed because children in 1950 obeyed more than they do now, but also because fear is a door you can close just by looking at it. We closed it. We stacked books. We went home. I did not sleep well. The next morning, I waited until Miss Clark left to eat her sandwich in the back office. I told Danny I wanted to see if the cat was in the yard. That was true. I also wanted to see if the gap was a dream. It wasn't. The panel opened on a push, narrow and reluctant. Behind it was darkness with a little of the library's light floating in like dust. Danny, who had a talent for being bold when he shouldn't, slid through sideways and made an inviting noise. I followed because that is what friends do when one of them forgets to be scared. We found a passage the width of a person and the length of a long breath, ending in a short flight of worn steps. The air smelled like the rest of the building at first, and then like rubber, oil, and old tin. At the bottom was a room the size of the librarian's office, built not of bricks but of shelving, and not clean like the circulation desk, but archive dirty. That smell of paper and glue and something that might be mouse. It was not a secret treasure room. It was not even very interesting until it was. On the floor lay Whisper, the cat, as if waiting. It got up and did the thing cats do when they want to lead you somewhere, a purposeful zigzag. We followed it down an aisle of old ledgers toward a cabinet whose drawers had labels handwritten in a neat, old-fashioned hand. Special accounting, bindery, civil defense, borrowers long term. The words looked official and boring. The last drawer had a reddish thread tied around its two pulls, as if to keep it closed or to remind someone to be careful. The thread looked new. Danny tugged it. The knot gave like a promise.
Inside lay a book, not thick but heavy, bound in dark leather that had been handled enough to grow smooth. A card pocket was glued to the inside with a single card in it, like the ones in regular books, except the spaces were for borrower, item, term, return. Someone had stamped due in red on the top. I felt an adult feeling then, the one that says you should put a thing back before you learn what it wants. Danny did not have that feeling. He eased the book out and opened it in his lap. The first page had rules written out in that same neat hand. They weren't library rules, they were terms. They said the special collection existed for the town's benefit. They said loans were private. They said agreements must be repaid. The last line said collateral could be provided by signatories or by community. The word community was underlined twice. Danny started to laugh, then didn't. We turned a page. There were entries going back decades, names we recognized from street signs and store windows. And under item were not books, but phrases. 3 months, an able pair of hands, 4 good harvests, a winter of sleeping through. Under return were things that made less sense. Second son, first tooth from each child, 2 nights per year, the town's silence. If you want to understand the feeling we had, imagine finding the ledger of a game that has rules you dimly know from your life but never signed. Imagine that the names belong to the people who built your town, and that the things traded are not objects, but time and luck and promises. Imagine being 9 and thinking you had entered a room where adults kept the real library. We heard a noise the book did not make. Shoes on the stairs. Not Miss Clark's step. She wore hard-soled shoes that ticked like clocks. These were faster, eager. The cat shot behind boxes and vanished. We slid the ledger back into the drawer, but the ribbon slid out like a tongue. Danny tucked it anyway. We squeezed into the narrow between-shelf space and held our breath, the way children do when they still believe breath has volume and will give them away. A man came into the room with the confidence of someone who owns keys. He was not old, not young, wearing a suit that had been pressed by a good iron and a bad conscience. He set a briefcase on the cabinet, took out papers and laid them on top of the ledger we had just touched. I could see the top page well enough to read the header, Special Loan Agreement. I could see the field where a name would be written. It was blank. The man had a problem. He needed something the library could loan. He had no collateral. He didn't work there. He belonged to the kind of men who come into libraries only to pass through. He looked around as if expecting someone. No one came. He took a pen, held it against the paper like a soldier considering surrender, then wrote his name. He wrote the item, 6 months peace. He wrote the term, from now. He looked at the field called return and stared as if the paper might fill itself. When it didn't, he left it blank. He put the pages away and the ledger on top of them, closed the drawer and tied the ribbon wrong. Then he took his briefcase and left as quickly as he had arrived.
Even at 9, I could tell he was the type of man who would pretend a blank field meant no bill. We might have stayed hidden,
But Whisper came out of nowhere with the confidence of a small god and slid itself between us and the cabinet, rubbing against my knee, nearly tripping me as I stepped out. It made a soft sound like a secret. Danny, laughing in relief, tried to scoop it up. The cat twisted. His hand hit the drawer. It yawed open. The book slid forward and slapped the floor like a hand. Miss Clark was capable of sounds that didn't match her size. She said our names in a tone that could have filed our bones into labels. She was there, just there, the way adults appear when they have always been in the room and you only now realize it. She looked at the ledger on the floor, then at us, then at the ribbon he had tied wrong. I braced for yelling. She did not yell. She did something worse. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and looked tired. A tired adult is scarier than an angry one. Angry is a weather pattern. Tired is climate. She asked how we had gotten in. I told her about the cat and about curiosity, and the truth felt thin once it left my mouth. She nodded as if to say, boys are rivers. They will run downhill. She picked up the ledger and checked something, then did a thing I did not understand until I was old. She decided which part of this to be angry about. We were marched, not yanked, upstairs and installed at a table with a stack of newspapers to flatten and a lecture about boundaries. She told us adults made special rooms to keep special things safe and to keep children from accidentally carrying the weight of them. She told us curiosity could take us places our shoulders weren't built for yet. Her voice was not harsh, it was practical. I hated it because it made sense. After closing, Danny and I walked home under a sky that looked like newspaper print, soaked and stretched. He swore we'd been this close to discovering the town's big secret. I said the secret was adults are boring. He said boring adults don't keep ledgers for luck and time. He said he wanted to come back later, at night, with a flashlight and no cat. I said he was an idiot. I said I would come. The library at night is not the library by day. The fans sound louder because they are the only thing making noise. Street lights turned windows into strangers. We went in through a basement window that had a gap big enough for Danny and an argument big enough for me. We kept the flashlight low and our ambitions lower. The panel opened like a breath. The passage welcomed us the way a mouth welcomes an answer. The secret room was cooler than the rest of the building, as if it belonged to a different season. We found the cabinet. The book sat exactly where it had before, except the card in the pocket had changed. The top line, borrower, now had a name written in the neat hand I recognized from all the labels. Under item was 6 months' peace. Under return, someone had written, one boy. My name was not on it. Danny's was.
I have relived the next minute so often I have worn grooves in it. I have tried to imagine the way out that doesn't exist. I have tried to forgive the child I was for the way he behaved. I have succeeded some years and failed others. I grabbed the card in the book and said there had to be a mistake. Danny said the town always takes from those who have least to spare, and laughed like a person who hopes you'll tell him he's wrong. He said it was a mean joke. He said Miss Clark would hear about it. He said no adult would let a ledger borrow a child. He said he was not afraid, and then swallowed in a way that told me he was. We took the card. We took the book. We rushed upstairs, meaning to shove the evidence in Miss Clark's face and demand sense. Night had a different plan. The hallway's air flattened, the way it does right before a summer storm or a confession. We heard someone move in the front room. Not the librarian, not the man with the briefcase. Someone else. You would like me to describe a monster. I can't. I can't because I didn't see what moved, only where it moved. I saw corners change their minds, shadows decide to attend. The best word I have is attention. The building's attention had turned toward us, and it did not feel like the attention of a person. It felt like a balance sheet remembering a missing number. We ran. The flashlight flicked off when my thumbs spasmed. We smashed knees into chairs and breath into each other. The panel was slower to open from this side, or my panic made it feel that way. The passage was longer going out.
The window to the yard was a coin slot we threw ourselves through. We fell into grass that felt like an argument we had won. At the fence line, Danny laughed a little hysterically and made a joke about overdue kids. His laugh never finished. It was clipped mid-flight by a sound like a book sliding into a slot. Soft, inevitable. I turned. He was gone. I do not mean gone like he ran. I do not mean gone like he hid. I mean absent in the way your pulse is absent for a terrible second and then returns. The grass where we had been was scuffed. The card was in my hand, bent where my fingers had tried to crush it into a different answer. The ledger under my arm had grown suddenly heavy. I called his name until my throat burned. I searched the yard, the alley, under the library stairs, the hedges, the next street. I searched until I had to choose between going home and becoming a missing child myself. I went home like a thief.
Morning brought police and mothers and a level of search our town had never rehearsed. I brought the card and the book to the library, intending to throw them at Miss Clark and burn the building down with my words. She was there before the doors opened, standing at the desk like a defendant who had decided to confess. She looked at the card and at me, and then at the space where Danny should have been. I expected denial. I expected her to tell me I had not seen what I had seen. She did not. She said there are old agreements older than our town, and that dirty paper holds them only until they don't need paper anymore. She said she had tried for years to keep boys like us from the math of it, because children carry debt too easily, even when the debt is not theirs. She said she would try to get him back, and that trying would have a price. She did not specify whose. I would like to say I was brave. I was not. I did not offer myself in his place. I did not swear oaths. I stood there with my knuckles on the counter and begged a woman I didn't like to perform a miracle I didn't understand. She took the ledger into the back. I heard a door open where no door ought to be, and a hum like bees in a jar deepen and then thin. She returned an hour later, looking older in a way that had nothing to do with years. She said the debt had been restructured. She said collateral had been found elsewhere. She did not say what elsewhere meant. She told me to take the card away and burn it, and never, ever return to the room behind the shelves. We did not find Danny that summer. We never did. His mother moved away the following year because the town became a mouth that kept saying her child's name wrong. The story that stuck was that he had run, as boys do in stories when adults need clean endings. I have read the words runaway and felt heat in my face that looked like anger and smelled like shame. The library stayed open. Children kept reading. Whisper still moved like a whisper. I kept the card. I could not burn it. I kept it in the box with the last letter from my father and the ribbon from a spelling bee and one marble Danny had left on my windowsill. Some years I could hold the box, some years I couldn't. 3 times in my life something slipped under my door on my birthday. All 3 times it was a notice the size and color of a library overdue slip. All 3 times it had only one word on it, stamped in red, due. The first arrived when I turned 12, the second when I turned 25, the third when I turned 50. I asked Miss Clark about the first one. She put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Sometimes paper is just paper, and sometimes it is not, and that either way, burning it helps." I burned that one. I kept the others. I learned that the world will let you live with a ghost if you agree to pretend it is a draft.
Miss Clark died the year I turned 39. The notice did not come that year. I told myself that meant something had been settled. I was wrong. When I turned 50, the DUE arrived in an envelope with no stamp. I took it to the library, now managed by a cheerful woman with earrings that chimed. The panel behind the shelves was sealed. She said it had always been sealed. Memory is not evidence. I thanked her and left and nearly threw up in the bushes. Life happens around and through the things we can't fix. I became a teacher. Perhaps because I wanted to keep boys from getting lost in rooms adults pretended not to know about. I married late and well, and failed at fatherhood by never attempting it. The library changed paints and chairs and attitudes. Whisper lived forever in my memory,
and for all I know, in the building, because some institutions do not replace the parts that work. Today, I turned 75. A white envelope with no stamp waited under my door. Inside was a thin card like the one I have kept all these years. It was blank, except for one block in the center, stamped in red. Returned. I do not know whether that means what I want it to. I do not know whether it's mercy or bookkeeping. I do know that I'm tired of carrying the box alone. That is why I am telling you this. Not to be believed. I have made peace with not being believed. Not to be forgiven. I have learned to do the work forgiveness demands without asking for it. I am telling you because silence accrues interest. Because kids still sneak into rooms adults pretend not to have, literal and otherwise. Because someone, somewhere, is looking at a ledger with the word community underlined and thinking it means someone else. If there is a moral, it is narrow and heavy. You cannot sign away what isn't yours to give. Not time, not children, not the town's silence. Debt paid with people is a story towns tell when they're tired. Don't let your town get tired. If a door opens in a place that shouldn't have a door, close it. Then ask yourself who it was built for and why they needed a secret.
I went back to the library this afternoon. It has a modern logo now and a children's area that would have made 1950 me weep from happiness. The new librarian is a man with kind eyes who offered me a card as if belonging were a service they still provided. I asked him mildly whether there was much trouble with noise. Into a shape that might have been a pillow was a black cat. The sun came through the window at a certain angle, and for a second I saw light draw the bones beneath the fur like chalk on a blackboard. The cat opened one eye, assessed me, and went back to its important work. I asked whether the basement was open to the public. He said the building didn't have one. Some truths are not for arguing. I thanked him and left and walked the long way around the block, past the place where the fence had once pressed against my thighs, past the alley where I had called a boy's name until it sounded like coughing. I went home and opened the box where I keep what I have not burned. The card with Danny's name is there, a little brittle at the corners, as if time had been nibbling it. The marble is there, green with a twist of white. The due notices are there, browned at the edges like bread. I added the new returned and closed the lid. Maybe it means he came back somehow, somewhere I don't get to see. Maybe it means the debt found a different balance. Maybe it means nothing and the universe enjoys using red ink. I am too old to choose certainty when humility is what I have left. But I will say this. Tonight, for the first time in years, I think I may sleep without dreaming of a room that smells like rubber and old tin, and a ledger that writes its own entries, and a cat that leads boys to doors adults are supposed to guard. If you are young and reading this, understand that curiosity is a beautiful engine. Treat it like fire. If you are old and reading this, check the rooms you're pretending not to have. If you work in a library, close the panels you know about. If you live in a town, never sign anything that spends another person. If you hear a child laugh at a fence line, count heads, then count again. I am 75. I am tired and grateful and a little less afraid. The box is lighter now that the story is out where air can touch it. If there is justice, it will not arrive in the shape I want. It will arrive in the way a library returns a book, a small clunk in a slot, a light turning from red to green, a record-changing state. Not dramatic, sufficient. Whisper, whatever cat in the world wears that name today, will stretch on a chair somewhere and let the afternoon show its bones through fur. A librarian will straighten a stack of returns and notice the silence before the fans switch on. Somewhere, a man is thinking of signing his name to a blank line and will hesitate the extra second that saves a boy. And a town will keep its doors and the rooms behind them where they belong in the light.